Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles.
Hello, my name is Adrian Whitford, but everyone usually calls me Addy. I'm 39 years old, and if you asked me what I do, I'd probably give a wry smile and say I'm trying to survive the storms my own family has stirred up. The story I'm about to tell isn't a fairy tale, nor is it a Hollywood movie with a guaranteed happy ending. It's my life, a messy tangle of love, betrayal, and wounds that never heal. Sit down, because I'm about to take you into my world, where supermarkets aren't just places to shop, but battlegrounds of families, ambitions, and broken hearts. I grew up in a lavish mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, where even the air seemed to carry the scent of money. The Whitford family, my family, was a symbol of wealth and power. My father, Charles Whitford, was the chairman and CEO of Whitford Retail Group, a high-end supermarket empire spanning across America. If you've ever stepped into a Whitford store, you'd see shelves gleaming under soft lighting, stocked with bottles of Bordeaux wine, boxes of cheese from Provence, and organic strawberries flown in from South America. Everything was perfect. From the way the light hit the artisanal jam jars to the meticulously trained smiles of the staff, that was my father's world, a world where everything had to be exquisite. I was the eldest son, destined to inherit this empire. From a young age, I was taught that the Whitford name wasn't just a name, it was a legacy. My father would sit at the head of the dining table in our opulent dining room lined with oil paintings and recount how my grandfather built the company from a single store in Manhattan. "Addy," he'd say, his voice low and sharp as a blade, "you are the future of Whitford retail. Don't let me down." I'd nod, solemnly, the way I was expected to, though deep down, I didn't understand why a 10-year-old boy needed to carry the weight of an entire family's legacy. Our household wasn't just a family, it was more like a dynasty. My mother, Monica, always appeared in silk dresses and pearl necklaces, but her eyes often seemed distant, as if she were living in a place she didn't want to be part of. My younger brother, Nicholas, 4 years my junior, was a carbon copy of my father, always knowing how to please him, always knowing when to flash the right smile. And me? I was the one who asked questions, the one who felt suffocated at dinner parties where guests only talked about stocks, real estate, and European vacations. But my life truly changed when I met Evelyn. She was a light in my dark world, and also the spark that ignited every tragedy that followed. I met Evelyn Lyman during my sophomore year at Stanford University. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, with golden leaves falling across the campus paths. I was sitting in the library, buried in an economics textbook, when she walked in, bringing with her a fresh breeze and the scent of freshly brewed coffee. I remember looking up from my notes, and there she was. Evelyn. She moved with quiet confidence, like she belonged in the room without ever needing to announce it. She wore a simple sweater, her hair tied up in a high ponytail, and her brown eyes sparkled as if they held an untold story. She sat at the table across from me, placed a stack of books down, and in the process, dropped her pen. It rolled toward me. I picked it up, handed it back to her, and when our fingers brushed, just for a second, I felt a jolt of electricity shoot through me. "Thank you," she said, flashing a smile that made me forget where I was. "I'm Evelyn Lyman. Addy Whitford," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady despite my heart pounding like a drum. "Nice to meet you." We started talking, first about the books we were reading, then about professors, then about everything else. With Evelyn, it wasn't forced. There was no need to perform. I quickly realized she wasn't the type to show off. She was intelligent, sharp, but carried herself with an ease and sincerity that made me feel like I could finally shed the armor I'd worn for years. She told me about her family. Her father, Roland Lyman, was the founder of Lyman Market, a chain of budget supermarkets serving working-class people in low-income communities. "My dad always says," Evelyn laughed, "everyone deserves to eat well, not just the wealthy." I chuckled with her, but something in her words lodged itself deep inside me. A twinge of unease stirred in my gut. Lyman Market. That name wasn't foreign to me, not at all. It was practically a curse in our house. They were the sworn enemy of Whitford Retail Group. The Lymans and the Whitfords were like two sides of the same coin, coexisting in the retail industry, but as different as night and day. Whitford Retail Group prided itself on being the brand of the elite, a place where customers would pay hundreds of dollars for a bottle of Italian olive oil simply because it came in a handcrafted glass bottle. I could still hear my father's voice in my head, condescending and certain, from a shareholders' meeting I had attended when I was 16. I'd been allowed to sit in the back, listening, watching him command the room. "They sell to people who don't know quality," he'd said with thinly veiled contempt. "They tarnish the retail industry." But Lyman Market didn't see it that way. Roland Lyman had built his company from a small store in Portland, Oregon. His mission wasn't glamour or prestige, it was access, dignity. He wanted to bring quality food to every American household, regardless of income. Their marketing campaigns didn't feature imported caviar or luxury balsamic reductions. They showed workers, single mothers, struggling families. And on weekends, they even offered free meals for children in underserved areas. My father had scoffed at that. Cheap PR stunts to win the masses, he'd said over dinner once, dismissively pouring himself a glass of wine. But me? I never said it aloud, but part of me respected it, even admired it. Whitford retail could command a market, sure, but what the Lymans did, that was something else. Something we'd never achieved, making a real difference. The rivalry between our families wasn't just surface level. It was a full-blown war. Our companies had sued each other more than once, over advertising campaigns, over store locations, over branding language my father claimed they'd borrowed from us. We fought over prime real estate in every major city, Chicago, Dallas, Miami. There was even a time at an industry conference when my father and Roland Lyman nearly came to blows over a comment about the true value of food. My brother Nicholas jokingly called it the war of the vegetable vendors. He'd laugh whenever the latest headline popped up about Whitford retail and Lyman Market battling it out in court or scrambling for store space in a new city. But to me, it felt like a tragic comedy. A decades-long feud where both sides were too consumed by their egos to see the harm they were causing. To their businesses, yes, but more so to their own families. And yet, despite it all, Evelyn and I fell in love. We didn't need five-star restaurants or luxury resorts. Our date nights were simple, sitting in a small diner off University Avenue in Palo Alto, eating greasy burgers and laughing about the absurdity of our economics exams. There was something so easy about being with her, like I could finally breathe. She always carried a notebook, pages filled with ideas, numbers, diagrams, and hopes. If we could deliver fresh produce within 24 hours at a low cost, she said once, scribbling madly with a pen that was half chewed, people wouldn't have to choose between quality and their budget. Her eyes lit up when she talked about these things. It wasn't business to her, it was purpose. And I loved that. I loved her passion. I loved the way she saw the world not through margins or prestige, but through empathy, through simple values. But somewhere deep inside, I also knew our love was a ticking time bomb. My father would never accept her, not just because she was Roland Lyman's daughter, but because she was everything he despised. The storm hit on a cold winter evening when I decided to bring Evelyn home. I should have known better, should have trusted that the fire between the Whitfords and the Lymans couldn't be cooled by charm or a kind smile. But still, I hoped. The Whitford mansion was aglow with chandeliers and gold-toned sconces. The long mahogany table was set like a royal banquet. Crystal glasses, folded linen napkins, silver polished to perfection. My mother stood at the head of the room in a navy silk gown, smiling tightly. Nicholas lounged at one end of the table, arms crossed, watching everything with quiet amusement. My father sat at the head, his expression calm. "Mom, Dad, this is Evelyn Lyman," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "She's studying with me at Stanford." Silence. You could hear the tick of the antique clock on the wall. Then, my father spoke. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of a gavel. "Lyman? Roland Lyman's daughter? The one ruining the retail industry." Evelyn tightened her grip on my hand under the table, but she didn't flinch. "Mr. Whitford," she said, her voice steady and calm, "my father built Lyman Market to help people, not to ruin anyone." My father let out a low, humorless laugh, the kind that made the hair on my arms rise. "Help people? You think selling cheap goods to the poor is helping them?" He leaned forward, his gaze cutting. "You're tarnishing this family's name. And Addie." He turned to me, eyes burning with disappointment. "You're disappointing me." That evening collapsed into shouting, words that couldn't be taken back. My father stood, pointed at me, red-faced and shaking. "If you choose this girl, you're no longer my son." Nicholas sat silently, like he always did when things turned ugly. But I saw it. The corner of his mouth curled slightly, as if he were enjoying the show. My mother didn't say a word. She just looked down, her napkin clenched tightly in her lap. I walked Evelyn to her car in silence, the cold biting at my face. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice cracking. "I didn't think it would be like this." She looked at me, soft and strong all at once. Then she wrapped her arms around me and whispered, "Addie, I don't need your family to accept me. I just need you." The weeks after that were worse than I could have imagined. My father summoned me to his office at Whitford Retail's headquarters in Manhattan. I'd been in that office 100 times as a boy, trailing behind him, watching how he ruled the empire from behind a desk of solid walnut and a view that stretched over the New York skyline. But that day, the room felt different. The space that once inspired awe now felt like a prison. He didn't offer me a seat. He just sat behind his desk, his eyes cold, fingers steepled under his chin. "I've made my decision," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Nicholas will inherit the company. You're no longer in the plan." I stood there, feeling the floor collapse beneath me. "Because of Evelyn?" I asked, my voice hoarse. My father didn't even blink. "Because you've betrayed this family," he replied, each word delivered like a sentence. "You chose the daughter of our enemy, a girl unworthy of the Whitford name. From now on, you're on your own." And just like that, it was done. I left the office in a daze. My footsteps echoed in the marble hallway as my mind reeled. I'd lost my place in the company. I'd lost my father's approval, maybe even my entire family. But when I called Evelyn, when I heard her warm voice answer with a simple, "Hey, love," the weight on my chest lifted, just a little. I knew then I had made the right choice. She was my home, the place where I belonged. Not long after, I visited the Lyman family in Portland. Their home was a modest wooden house nestled in a quiet suburb. The front yard was nothing fancy, just a small garden full of tomatoes, cucumbers, and squash. Real food, real life. Roland Lyman opened the door and greeted me with a smile. He was wearing a worn-out flannel shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, his hands calloused from years of honest work. He looked me over, not with suspicion, but with calm acceptance. "Addie," he said, placing a firm hand on my shoulder. "You love my daughter. And that's enough. I don't care if you're Charles Whitford's son or anyone else. Your family." I looked at him, then at Evelyn, standing beside him barefoot on the porch, her hair still wet from a morning shower. And for the first time in my life, I felt truly accepted. No conditions, no legacy, just love. Still, deep down, I knew the war between the Whitfords and the Lymans wasn't just about business. It was personal. It was bitter and old and bruised in places you couldn't see. And now I was standing right on the dividing line. My story was just beginning. Because this isn't just a story about supermarkets, money, or power. It's a story about hearts, about choices, and about the price you pay when you dare to live true to yourself. 3 years later, I stood in front of the mirror in our small Seattle apartment, trying to tie my tie with trembling hands. The memories still clung to me, my father's voice, his cold eyes, his final words echoing like a curse. Nicholas had become the heir to Whitford Retail Group, and I had chosen Evelyn. 3 years. But every time I looked at myself in the mirror, I could still feel my father watching me, judging from afar. Roland Lyman had offered me a position at Lyman Market more than once. "You have talent," he'd said during one of my visits to their home in Portland. "You could help us bring good food to more people." But I declined. I didn't want to be known as the son-in-law with a handout. I wanted to stand on my own 2 feet. Or maybe, if I'm honest, it was the guilt. Joining Lyman Market would have felt like crossing a final line. Like betraying my father in a way I wasn't ready to face. Not yet. So I chose another path. I joined Freshroot, a small logistics startup in Seattle that was trying to crack a seemingly impossible code. How to get farm-fresh produce and meat into consumers' hands within 24 hours at the lowest possible cost. It wasn't glamorous. It was grueling. Long days in a stuffy office. Late nights poring over spreadsheets, delivery data, and routing maps. But I loved it. Not just because it was meaningful, but because it was mine. I worked alongside people who didn't care about the name on my birth certificate. Only what I could do. Evelyn and I got married on a spring afternoon, about 3 years after we graduated. The wedding took place in a small white church on the outskirts of Portland. There were no lavish receptions, no guests in Armani suits or glittering ball gowns. Just the Lyman family, a few close friends from Stanford, and a priest with a kind smile. That was our wedding. Simple, honest, and full of more love than any ballroom at the plaza could ever hold. Roland walked Evelyn down the aisle, his eyes shimmering with pride, and something else. Something quieter. A touch of sadness, maybe, knowing he was letting her go. After the ceremony, he pulled me into a hug. His arms were strong, grounded in decades of hard work. "You're my son now, Addie," he whispered into my ear. "Take care of her." "I will," I told him, and I meant it more than I'd ever meant anything in my life. No one from the Whitford family showed up. I had sent an invitation, not out of hope, but because I needed to try. I needed to believe that maybe someone in my family still saw me as theirs. The only response came from my mother. A text message. "Wishing you happiness, Addie. I'm sorry." That was it. No punctuation. No explanation. Just a quiet signal from someone who had long since surrendered to the storm that was my father. From my father, there was nothing. Not even silence. Just absence. But Nicholas? Nicholas found a way to make his voice heard. He posted a photo on social media, Crystal glass raised high at some flashy party in the Hamptons, surrounded by models and trust fund kids. The caption read, "Congrats to my brother on his big day, choosing love over family." I stared at it, feeling a cold stab in my chest. The words weren't angry. They were worse. They were mocking. Nicholas had always known how to twist the knife without getting blood on his hands. But I didn't respond. Not publicly. Not privately. I'd learned by then that sometimes silence is the strongest reply. Seattle became our refuge. A city of gray skies and green trees, of coffee shops tucked between bookstores, and ferries gliding across Puget Sound. Our apartment was on the 5th floor of a sleek, modern building, nothing fancy, but filled with light. From the window, we could see the water, the mountains in the distance, and sometimes, if we were lucky, seagulls perched on the railing like curious guests. It wasn't the Greenwich Mansion, but it was ours. I remember the day we moved in. Evelyn stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, her hair in a messy bun, hands on her hips. "Addie," she said, eyes wide with mock drama, "we have a kitchen table. A real kitchen table." I laughed and pulled her into my arms, holding her as we turned slowly in the middle of the chaos. We had no antique chandeliers or marble floors, but we had love, and that was more than enough. 2 years later, Oriana was born. She came into the world with a scream and a full head of dark hair, and from the moment I saw her, I knew my life had changed again. She was Evelyn in miniature, those big brown eyes, that radiant smile, and, eventually, a stubborn streak that could bring a grown man to his knees. When Oriana was 3, Marcus arrived. He was quieter, softer, a thinker. He had my eyes, deep-set and watchful, and a way of looking at the world that made me wonder what he was already trying to figure out. I'd watch them both playing on the living room floor, toys scattered around like confetti, and I'd feel it, the truth. This was the real legacy. Not Whitford retail. Not boardrooms and quarterly reports. It was Oriana's laughter as I pushed her on a swing. It was Marcus toddling over, arms outstretched, saying "Papa" in that sticky toddler voice that melted everything inside me. Evelyn was the soul of our family. She worked part-time with a nonprofit helping underserved communities get access to healthy food. And in the evenings, she'd sit at our kitchen table. Yes, that kitchen table, going over spreadsheets and transport models with me. "If we could cut transportation costs by another 10%, she said one night, tapping her pen on a page, "we could get fresh carrots to even the poorest neighborhoods." Her eyes sparkled when she said things like that, like she was already tasting the future. I loved her even more in those moments, because she took something as mundane as logistics and turned it into a kind of hope. But not everything was perfect. Despite everything I did to cut ties with the Whitfords, their shadow never fully disappeared. It lingered, like smoke you couldn't scrub from the walls. My mother called sometimes, her voice soft, unsure, like she was speaking across a battlefield. "Addie, are you doing okay?" she'd ask. "How are the kids?" "I'm fine, Mom," I'd say. "They're great. Oriana started preschool. Marcus is trying to eat the furniture." She'd laugh softly, then fall quiet. I always knew what she wasn't saying. What she couldn't say. She'd never stand up to my father. She never had. Nicholas, on the other hand, he never missed a chance to remind me of the cost of my choice. Once, out of the blue, he sent me a link to a glossy article in Fortune about Whitford Retail's record profits and international expansion. Beneath it was a simple message. "Look at what you're missing. We just opened 5 new stores in California. Too bad for you." I didn't reply. I just nodded, letting his words hang in the air like smoke. They shouldn't have bothered me, shouldn't, but they did. Not because I missed the empire I'd walked away from, but because deep down, a part of me still wanted something to change. Not the money, not the business, my family. After moving to Seattle, I kept reaching out. I wrote letters to my mother, sent photos of Oriana and Marcus. Oriana in her little sunflower dress, Marcus making a mess with finger paints. I told her about their milestones, the silly things they said at breakfast, our trips to the farmer's market. I wanted to share our life, show her what I was building. But most of the time, there was silence. Once, she sent Oriana a birthday card with a $10,000 check inside. I remember holding it in my hands for a moment too long. Then I wrote her back with a short note. "Thank you, Mom, but we don't need the money. We're happy." And we were. Life at Fresh Route wasn't always easy. Some weeks I worked 80 hours, falling asleep at my desk, dragging myself home with deep lines under my eyes. There were nights I barely saw the kids, and mornings where I left before the sun even touched the windows. But Evelyn was always there. Always. Waiting with a mug of coffee, her eyes still sleepy, but her smile warm. "You're doing something amazing, Addie," she'd say, curling up next to me on the couch. "Every Fresh Route truck is a family eating fresh produce. Don't give up." And I didn't. We pushed through. We built a real-time tracking system that cut our delivery time from 48 hours to 24. Slowly, the small farms began to trust us. Orders picked up. Revenue started to climb. No, I wasn't raking in millions like my father, but I was proud. This meant something. I wasn't just padding my net worth. I was building something that helped real people. Something that mattered. One Sunday, Evelyn suggested we take a break. Just the four of us. There's that park near the lake, she said. Let's take the kids for a picnic. So we did. The sky was soft blue, the kind of color that makes everything feel gentle. Oriana, 5 now, ran barefoot through the grass, chasing a butterfly with a paper kite in one hand. Marcus, not even 2, rode high on my shoulders, laughing as I clomped around the picnic blanket pretending to be a horse. Evelyn lay on her stomach, her book open in front of her. Every now and then, she'd peek over the top of the pages to smile at us, her hair catching the sunlight. Sometimes, she said as I plopped down beside her, I think we found paradise. I wrapped my arm around her waist and pulled her closer. My paradise is you, I said, grinning. She laughed and nudged my shoulder with her fist. So cheesy, Whitford. But she said it with that smile, the one that told me she liked the cheese. The kind of moment you want a bottle to freeze in time. That was our last picnic. I didn't know it then, but I'd never again hold her hand like that. Never see Oriana sprint through a sunlit meadow with that butterfly kite. We packed up as the sun set, golden light stretching across the lake, casting everything in a glow that made it all feel eternal. Oriana dozed off in the back seat, clutching the kite. Marcus, half asleep, rested his head against his sister's shoulder. Evelyn sat beside me, humming a lullaby her mother used to sing, soft, low, comforting. I drove. My fingers loosely gripped the wheel, my heart full in a way I hadn't felt in years. The Tulane highway snaked gently through fields and trees, the jazz station playing something slow and sweet. Evelyn reached over and laced her fingers with mine. Today was fun, wasn't it? She murmured. It was perfect, I said, glancing at her. We should do this more often. I nodded. More often. Maybe next. My words were cut off by a blinding light ahead. A massive container truck like a monstrous beast veered across the center line, heading straight for us. I only heard Evelyn scream, Addie, be careful, before everything plunged into darkness. When I woke up, I was in a stark white room. The sharp, sterile smell of antiseptic filled the air, and the light was too bright, stabbing at my eyes. My head throbbed, my left arm was completely numb, and there was a strange emptiness lodged deep in my chest, like something vital had been torn out. A nurse stood beside my bed, checking a chart. She noticed I was awake. You're awake, she said gently, her voice soft but careful, like she didn't want to disturb something fragile. What happened? I rasped, my throat dry and raw. Where am I? You're in St. Jude Medical. You have a broken arm and some minor injuries, she said, not looking directly at me. You're very lucky. Lucky. The word felt like a cruel joke. My mouth twisted around it. I tried to sit up, but the movement sent a jolt of pain through my body. I groaned, feeling my chest tighten with panic. My wife, my kids. I croaked, the words catching in my throat. Where are they? The nurse froze for just a second, barely long enough for most people to notice, but I saw it. Her eyes darted away, down to the chart. I'll get the doctor, she said quickly, already moving toward the door. A cold, crawling chill ran down my spine. Something was wrong. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't. A few minutes later, a doctor entered. He looked like he hadn't slept, middle-aged, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He pulled a chair close to my bed and sat down. Mr. Whitford, he began softly, I'm so sorry. My heart began pounding. The accident, it was severe. I stared at him. Your wife and 2 children, they didn't make it. Everything around me collapsed in that moment. I heard the words, but they didn't land. They just hovered there in the air, empty and unbelievable. No, I whispered. No, you're wrong. They're fine. They have to be. Evelyn, I muttered, almost to myself. She has the brightest smile. She was right there. Oriana, my little girl. She just learned to braid her own hair. Marcus, he calls me Papa every time I walk through the door. No, you're wrong. The doctor placed a hand on my shoulder. I shoved it away. Take me to them. I shouted, struggling to get up. Pain surged through my arm and chest, but I didn't care. Where are they? Evelyn. Oriana. Marcus. The nurse rushed back in, and together they tried to calm me. I kept fighting, screaming their names, my vision blurred with tears. Then I felt the sharp pinch of a needle. The sedative worked fast. I collapsed back, unable to scream anymore. The tears streamed down my face, but no sound came. Just silence. A cold, suffocating void spread through me, swallowing everything I had ever loved. The days that followed were worse than any nightmare. I didn't speak. I barely moved. I lay in the hospital bed, staring at the ceiling tiles, trying to piece together the moment before everything ended. They told me the truck driver had fallen asleep at the wheel. He'd lost control and crashed head-on into our car. He survived, with only a few scratches. But Evelyn, Oriana, Marcus, they never stood a chance. I didn't know what to feel. Rage? Hatred? But I was hollowed out. There was nothing left in me to feel anything. I was just empty. Evelyn's parents flew in from Portland as soon as they got the call. They sat beside me for hours, sometimes saying nothing, just holding my hand. Marjorie, Evelyn's mother, held on to me like she was afraid I'd disappear too. Her frail shoulders shook as she cried. Addie, she sobbed, you're our son. We lost Evelyn and the kids, but we won't lose you. Roland, her father, didn't say much. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in a day. The pain in his eyes was unbearable. He sat there, silent, shoulders slumped, like the accident had taken not only his daughter and grandchildren, but a piece of his soul. What do you need, Addie? He asked once. Anything. Just tell me. I didn't answer. I didn't know what I needed. I only knew what I wanted. I wanted time to turn back. I wanted to hold Evelyn again. I wanted to hear Oriana's laugh. I wanted to see Marcus wobble over to me, arms outstretched. But time doesn't grant wishes. The wits of my own family were a different story. I called my mother, my hands trembling so badly I could barely hold the phone. I left a voicemail, my voice cracking as I spoke. Mom, there's been an accident. Evelyn, the kids, they're gone. I didn't say more. I couldn't. I hoped, naively, maybe, that this would be the moment they'd come, that they'd put everything aside. Just once. That they'd show up for me. Not for the perfect son, not for appearances, but for me. But no one came. When my mother called back, her voice was soaked in guilt. Addie, she said, voice low. I wanted to come. I did. But your father, he wouldn't allow it. He said I shouldn't interfere with the life you chose. I sat there in silence, gripping the phone, feeling the grief shift into something colder. Mom, I said, barely breathing the words. My wife, and your 2 grandchildren, they're dead. Do you understand? They're dead. There was a long pause, then the sound of her sobs. Deep, rattling, hopeless sobs. But still, she didn't come. And my father, he didn't even call. Said nothing. As always. Later, I found out something that stung even more than his silence. While I stood in a hospital hallway identifying bodies, while I sat on the floor trying to remember how to breathe, my father was throwing a birthday party. Nicholas's party. At the Greenwich Mansion. Expensive wine, laughter, high-profile guests, photographers. Life moved on for them. I was never even a footnote. The funeral was held at a small church in Portland. It was where Evelyn had grown up, a place she once said made her feel grounded. I stood before 3 coffins, 3, lined up at the altar. 2 of them so small they barely looked real. Oriana still clutched her butterfly kite, the one she had begged me to take to the park that morning. Her face was soft, like she had just fallen asleep on the ride home. Marcus looked the same, peaceful, untroubled, like he was dreaming about dinosaurs or flying. And Evelyn. She looked like she always did when she napped beside me on the couch after putting the kids to bed. Her brown hair fell gently across her cheeks, her lips closed like she still had something she wanted to say to me. I would have given anything to hear it. I sent a funeral notice to the Whitfords, I told Roland. He turned to me sharply. Why? He asked, his voice tight. They don't deserve it, Addie. I know, I said, staring straight ahead. But I sent it anyway. He sighed and looked down. They won't come. And he was right. No one came. No Whitfords. No note. Not a formal condolence. Not even a cold, typed email. I stood there that day in the church cemetery, clutching the crumpled eulogy I never managed to read out loud. The words blurred as much as the tears in my eyes. Roland stood beside me. He didn't speak for a while, just kept a hand on my shoulder. Then, quietly but firmly, he said, You're my son. You lost your wife, your children, but you haven't lost your family. We're here, Addie. We'll always be here. I nodded, but it felt hollow. Because I knew the truth. I had lost everything. Evelyn was my light. Oriana and Marcus were why I woke up every morning. Now there was nothing but silence. A void where joy had lived. The weeks after the funeral passed like fog. I returned to our apartment in Seattle. Every corner was haunted. Oriana's pink dress still hung in the closet. Marcus's tiny shoes were in the corner, neatly lined up like he might put them on again any minute. Evelyn's notebook sat open on the kitchen table, filled with scribbled ideas for her fresh food blog, doodles in the margins, recipes she never got to try. I couldn't touch any of it. I couldn't throw anything away either. Each night, I lay in our bed staring at the ceiling, reaching into my memory for Evelyn's voice. Oriana's laugh. The way Marcus wrapped his hand around my finger like it was the most important thing in the world. But the harder I tried to remember, the more they faded. As if my own grief was erasing them. Roland and Marjorie came by often. They brought food, sat with me, shared stories about Evelyn as a child. Stories I hadn't heard before, some funny, some heartbreaking. They tried to pull me back, to anchor me to something. But I could see it in their faces, too. The same weight, the same hollowness. We were survivors left to face a world that no longer felt the same. One evening, as I sat alone in the dark apartment, the doorbell rang. For a moment, I didn't move. I assumed it was Roland, maybe checking in again, maybe bringing me food I wouldn't eat. But when I opened the door, it wasn't him. It was my mother. She stood there in a long beige coat, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Addie," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry I couldn't come to the funeral. Your father, don't talk about him." I cut her off sharply. My voice came out colder than I expected, but I didn't care. I was done pretending. "Why are you here?" She didn't answer at first. Instead, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. I stood still, rigid, but I could feel her body trembling against mine. "I wanted to see you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I wanted to know if you're okay." I didn't respond. I wasn't okay, and we both knew it. I didn't need her concern, not now, not when everything that mattered had already been torn away. But I let her stay. She was still my mother. We sat in silence for a long time. She on the edge of the couch, her hands nervously twisting a tissue. I on the floor, leaning against the wall, staring into the void of the dark apartment. For the first time, I saw her not as the woman who'd stood beside my father in silence, but as someone just as trapped, a victim of the same machine. The gilded cage of the Whitford name had confined us all. Maybe her in different ways, but confined all the same. Still, her presence didn't soothe me. It only reminded me that the people who were supposed to be there, the ones who shared my blood, had chosen to stay out of my life when it mattered most. 6 months after the accident, I made a decision. I couldn't keep living like a shadow, trapped beneath the weight of grief and silence. I couldn't let pain define me. One morning, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror. My reflection stared back at me with hollow eyes. My skin looked dull, my cheeks sunken. I barely recognized myself. "You have to do something, Addie," I said aloud. My voice echoed in the tiled space. "For Evelyn. For Oriana. For Marcus." I sat down that afternoon and wrote a final letter. Short. No frills. Just a few clean, sharp lines. "I'm no longer part of the Whitford family. Don't contact me again." I printed 3 copies, one each for my father, my mother, and Nicholas. I signed them, sealed them, and sent them out. Then I turned off my phone. I didn't want apologies. I didn't want explanations. I sold every share my grandfather had left me in Whitford Retail Group. The transaction cleared within the week. It was a substantial sum, more than enough for a new life, maybe even 10 lives. But I didn't need money. Money couldn't buy back Evelyn's laughter. Money couldn't hold Oriana's tiny hand or rock Marcus to sleep. Money couldn't wipe away the blood on the road. What I needed was clarity. And a cold, decisive plan. No mercy. Then I picked up the phone and called Roland Lyman. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Addie." I took a breath. "Dad," I said. It was the first time I'd ever called him that. My throat tightened. "I want to join Lyman Market. I want to carry on what Evelyn dreamed of." There was a pause on the other end. I thought maybe the call had dropped. But then I heard his breath, a deep inhale, shaky. "Welcome home, son," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I moved to Portland a week later. Roland and Marjorie welcomed me into their home like a son returned from war. The wooden house was exactly as I remembered. Creaky porch, ivy curling along the railings, a vegetable garden out back that smelled of damp earth and rosemary. Inside, it smelled of warmth, bread, old wood, and something intangible, something like love. Marjorie pulled me into a hug the moment I stepped through the door. She didn't say much, just held me and cried softly against my shoulder. "We'll get through this together, Addie," she said, brushing her hand over my hair. "For Evelyn. For the kids." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. But inside, I knew the truth. I hadn't come to Portland just to heal. I'd come to fight. Not just for Evelyn. Not just for Oriana or Marcus. But for me. The Whitfords had abandoned me. And now, I was abandoning them. My decision to join Lyman Market sent a shock wave through the media. Business news platforms erupted. Disowned son of Charles Whitford joins direct competitor. Some headlines called me a traitor. Others labeled me a maverick breaking tradition. I didn't care. I wasn't doing it for the headlines. I wasn't doing it to prove anything to the world. I was doing it for Evelyn. For Oriana. For Marcus. And to find meaning in a life that had been shattered. Roland brought me onto the leadership team as Director of Strategic Development. Lyman Market's office was in a modest building in Portland. No oil paintings, no city skyline views, no sleek glass towers. But the difference was in the people. Here, there was warmth. Here, there was sincerity. Here, employees called Roland Uncle Ron. And they didn't work for money. They worked for a shared belief in the company's mission, to bring good food to every American family. On my first day at Lyman Market, I sat in a meeting room with Roland and the other directors. The air was thick with unspoken questions. They looked at me with curiosity, some with open skepticism. Suits crisp, eyes narrowed. I was an outsider stepping into a company they had built with their hands, their time, their sweat. "You're Charles Whitford's son," the finance director said, his tone guarded and measured, like a man handling something potentially dangerous. "Why are you here?" I met his gaze without blinking. "I'm here because I believe in what Lyman Market is doing. And because I want to carry on my wife's dream, bringing fresh, affordable food to everyone, not just the wealthy." The room fell into a heavy silence, the kind that hums in your ears. Then Roland smiled, a slow, genuine smile, and placed a hand on my shoulder. "That's the answer I wanted to hear," he said. "Let's get to work, Addie." And we did. I threw myself into the job like a man running from his own shadow. Every morning, I woke up at 5 o'clock, bleary-eyed, and opened Evelyn's notebook. The pages were worn from how often I turned them, tracing her handwriting with my thumb. Her ideas, sharp, compassionate, endlessly practical, became my compass. She had seen things in this industry I hadn't, things I now saw more clearly than ever. I proposed a strategy rooted in what I knew best, logistics. Drawing on the tech I helped develop at Fresh Route, I laid out a new plan, a fresh, in 24 hours distribution system. The idea was simple, but it demanded precision, coordination, and belief. Deliver farm-fresh food to our stores within a day, and do it at the lowest cost possible. If we could pull it off, Lyman Market wouldn't just grow, it would challenge Whitford retail head-on. Even in cities my father had long treated as his personal empire, Chicago, Miami, Dallas. Roland backed me fully. "You can do this," he said during one of our late-night meetings, the clock nearing midnight as we pored over projections and route maps. "Evelyn would be proud of you." Her name always hit me in the chest, like a fist I never saw coming. I nodded, gripping my pen tightly. "I won't let you down, Dad." And I meant it. Not just Roland. I was saying it to myself. For the first time, I realized I wasn't just working for Evelyn anymore. I was working for me, to prove I could build something that mattered, without leaning on the Whitford name like a crutch. Months later, we launched the Eat Well Without Being Wealthy campaign. It was my idea, born straight from Evelyn's notes. We weren't just selling groceries, we were telling a story. One about dignity and decency, about food as a right, not a luxury. We featured ordinary people, factory workers, teachers, single moms, and families eating together without worrying about their bank accounts. Our ads rolled out across TV and social media. Smiling farmers, kids with sticky hands holding fresh apples. A simple message, Lyman Market, good food for everyone. It was a direct shot at Whitford retail. And it landed. My father, who had built his empire on exclusivity and premium price tags, couldn't understand it. Why were middle-class families, the same ones who used to line up outside his stores, now flocking to ours? Why were the numbers shifting? Articles popped up online. Lyman Market is redefining food retail, while Whitford retail is stuck in the past. I read them quietly, alone in my apartment or sometimes in the back corner of the office, and felt a strange mix of pride and vindication. But beneath all that, there was still something deeper. I was doing this because I believed Evelyn had been right. Everyone deserves to eat well, not just the rich. One evening, long after the office had emptied and the city outside had quieted down to a low hum, my phone rang. "Nicholas." I stared at the screen for a moment, debating whether to answer. But some part of me, curiosity, guilt, maybe just habit, won out. I picked up. "Hey, big brother." His voice came through cold and mocking. "Heard you're making waves at Lyman Market. Congrats, trader." Nicholas's voice slithered through the speaker like oil. "Nicholas," I said, struggling to stay calm. "If you're just calling to mock me, hang up." "Oh no," he sneered. "I just wanted to remind you that you're digging your own grave. Dad won't let this slide. You think you can beat Whitford retail? You're wrong." I didn't respond. I hung up, but his words echoed in my mind long after the call ended. I knew my father. He wasn't just a businessman. He was someone who never forgave those who dared challenge him. And I, his eldest son, was now his greatest enemy. I sat in my small office at Lyman Market's headquarters in Portland, the fluorescent light casting a cold glow over the cluttered desk in front of me. Papers, charts, receipts, forecasts. The computer screen glowed with the latest revenue data. Lyman Market was growing, fast. not in small steps, but in leaps and bounds. The Eat Well, Without Being Wealthy campaign had upended the food retail market. Our stores in Chicago, Miami, and Dallas, cities once considered impregnable fortresses of Whitford retail, were now teeming with customers. Housewives, workers, even some of the most loyal patrons of my father's upscale brand were now choosing Lyman Market for fresh, affordable produce. But I didn't let myself get complacent. Every night before bed, I opened Evelyn's notebook. I'd run my fingers over the worn edges before flipping it open, rereading her slanted handwriting. Fresh in 24 hours. Every family deserves it. Those words were the fire that kept me going. The reason I woke up each morning and threw myself into the work like a man racing against time. I wasn't doing this to defeat my father, though a small part of me couldn't deny the satisfaction of watching Whitford retail falter. I was doing this for Evelyn, for Oriana, for Marcus, to prove that a person could live true to their values no matter the cost. One autumn morning, as golden leaves blanketed Portland streets, Roland Lyman called me into his office. He sat behind his desk, his silver hair gleaming under the soft light, but his eyes were as sharp as the first day I met him. "Addie," he said, sliding a folder across the table, "you've done what I never dared to dream. Lyman Market is now a name on everyone's lips. But do you know what that means?" I looked at him, waiting. Roland smiled, but there was something else in that smile, a flicker of concern. "It means Charles Whitford won't sit idly by. He's losing market share, losing shareholders, and most importantly, he's losing his reputation. A man like Charles doesn't accept defeat." I nodded. I wasn't surprised. I knew my father too well. He was the kind of man who would rather burn his empire to the ground than let it fall into someone else's hands. "I'm ready," I said, my voice steady. "If he wants a fight, I'll give him one." Roland looked at me for a moment, then leaned back in his chair, his gaze softening. "You remind me of Evelyn," he said. She had that same look, the look of someone who never gives up. I clenched my fists, feeling my heart tighten. Every mention of Evelyn brought her image to mind, her radiant smile and sparkling eyes. But I didn't let my emotions pull me under. I had a mission, and I would see it through. Whitford retail began to crumble faster than I expected. The quarterly financial reports told the story in cold, black numbers. Their revenue was on a steady decline, especially in cities where Lyman Market had expanded aggressively. Chicago, Dallas, gone. Their stores there had to close, unable to compete with our prices and our speed. I didn't take pleasure in their failure, but I didn't regret it either. Middle-class customers, once captivated by Whitford retail's glamour and pretense, realized something important. They didn't need to spend hundreds of dollars on a bottle of olive oil or imported cheese to feel good about what they were eating. They wanted fresh, affordable food, and Lyman Market was delivering it. I leaned heavily on my experience at Fresh Route. The fresh in 24-hour system we implemented wasn't just a slogan. It was a revolution in logistics and trust. We partnered with local farms, used real-time tracking technology, and streamlined every step of the process so that fruits and vegetables reached our customers within a day of harvest. Suppliers, many of whom had once hesitated to work with us, fearing retaliation from Whitford retail, were now approaching us. I sat across from them in meetings, shook their hands, and made transparent deals that prioritized efficiency and mutual respect. They appreciated my approach, sure, but more than that, they saw potential. Lyman Market wasn't just another retailer. We were growing fast, and we were growing right. But not everyone was pleased. Nicholas began appearing in the media, making the rounds in his perfectly tailored suits, trying to salvage Whitford retail's image. I caught one of his interviews on CNBC. He sat upright, voice smooth, practiced. "Whitford retail isn't just a supermarket chain," he said, his lips curled in that slight smirk he always used when he felt superior. "We're a symbol of sophistication and quality. Competitors like Lyman Market may attract customers with low prices, but they'll never match our class." I turned off the TV. My chest felt tight, not because I was intimidated, but because I knew what this meant. Nicholas was setting the tone. They were preparing for something bigger. I could feel it. Numbers don't lie, I reminded myself. Whitford retail was bleeding, but I also knew my father well enough to understand that they wouldn't go quietly. They'd launch a counterattack. I just didn't expect it to come so quickly. A few days later, I was in my office early, reviewing revenue reports, sipping my second coffee. The numbers looked good, better than good. And then Roland walked in. He didn't knock. He held a newspaper in his hand, his face grim. "You need to read this," he said, voice tight. I took the paper from him. The Wall Street Journal. My eyes landed immediately on the bold headline. "Whitford retail accuses Lyman Market of copyright infringement in advertising campaign." My stomach twisted. I read the article in silence. There it was, my father's name, in full, quoted directly. Lyman Market's Eat Well, Without Being Wealthy campaign mimics our earlier messaging strategy from 2006. We believe this constitutes intellectual property theft and intend to seek damages through litigation. Millions in damages. He wasn't bluffing. I felt my blood boil. My hands curled into fists around the edges of the paper. This wasn't the first time he'd pulled this move. Years ago, when Evelyn was just a child, he sued Lyman Market into the ground, filed injunctions, froze their accounts, dragged them through the courts until they had no fight left. I'd watched it all from the corner of his boardroom like a silent, powerless teenager. But I wasn't that boy anymore. I was Adrian Lyman, Director of Strategic Development, and I wouldn't let him win so easily this time. I stood up and called an emergency meeting with our legal team. When we gathered in the conference room, I didn't waste time with small talk. They have no evidence, I said firmly, placing the newspaper on the table. Our campaign was built on Evelyn's ideas, directly from her notebook. This is a dirty tactic, but we won't back down. Our head counsel, Deborah, leaned forward. We've reviewed their claim. Legally, it's weak. They'd have a hard time proving infringement based on that old campaign. But that's not the point. What do you mean? She sighed. Charles Whitford doesn't need to win. He just needs to distract us. Delay us. Make the public question our ethics. Drag our name through enough headlines to slow your momentum and shake investor confidence. I sat back in my chair, jaw tight. I knew she was right. This wasn't about justice or merit. It was about legacy, about control, about fear. I looked around the room at my team, people who had trusted me, who had taken a chance on this vision. This isn't just a lawsuit, I said quietly. It's a declaration of war. My father was sending a message. I could feel it in every carefully worded clause of the lawsuit, in every public statement his lawyers made. It was his way of reminding me that he still controlled the game, that I had dared to challenge him and now had to pay the price. But he was wrong. I was no longer Addie Whitford, the obedient eldest son who followed orders and smiled on cue. I was Addie, fighting for my wife's dream, and I wouldn't let him destroy it. The lawsuit dragged on for months. It was exhausting, expensive, and ugly, but it didn't deter us. While the lawyers handled the paperwork and the counterclaims, I poured myself into Lyman Market. I knew what Evelyn would have done: move forward, stay focused, believe in the mission. We opened 10 new stores, from Atlanta to San Francisco. Cities that had long been dominated by overpriced boutique markets or soulless chain stores were now home to Lyman Markets. And each grand opening felt like a personal dagger aimed at my father's pride. I imagined him in his high-rise Manhattan office, reading quarterly reports showing Whitford Retail's declining numbers. I imagined his jaw tightening, his fingers curling into fists. His empire was shrinking, and I wasn't even trying to hurt him, just trying to build something better. But I didn't stop. I pushed harder, launching the Eat Well Without Being Wealthy campaign. We rolled out new ads featuring real families, not models, not polished influencers, just people. One ad showed a single mother from Chicago in her tiny kitchen holding a basket of fresh produce. I used to think fresh food was only for the rich, she said, her voice steady. Lyman Market proved me wrong. Audiences responded immediately. The stories felt real because they were real. Sales jumped. Social media lit up. Parents, students, retirees, people we had never reached before, were tagging us, sharing their meals, thanking us. And the ripples spread. Suppliers began pulling away from Whitford Retail. One morning, I sat down with a black coffee and opened an email from a major California farmers cooperative. The subject line read, "Let's talk." I clicked it open. "We've been watching Lyman Market closely. Your way of doing business is transparent and respects us. We'd like to shift our entire contract to you." I just stared at the screen for a moment. Then I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. I got up, found Oriana in the office, and just said, "They're leaving Whitford. For us." She hugged me right there, tight and silent. And then came Las Vegas. The National Food Retail Conference was a yearly spectacle, but this year, Lyman Market had been invited. Not as an upstart novelty, but as a serious player. I was to be the speaker. Me. I stood backstage, adjusting the collar of my shirt. My heart wasn't pounding with nerves, it was something else. A weight and awareness. I knew my father was in that audience. Somewhere among the CEOs, reporters, and analysts, he'd be sitting quietly, watching, judging. I walked onto the stage. The lights hit me. The room blurred, but my voice came out strong. Lyman Market isn't just about selling food. I began. We're about bringing hope. We believe every American family, rich or poor, deserves to eat well. I let the words breathe, let the silence stretch for just a second. We're not building a brand for the elite, I continued. We're building a brand for everyone. The crowd applauded. But in that moment, I wasn't speaking to them. I was speaking to Evelyn. to Oriana, to Marcus, to everyone who believed in what we were doing, and to myself. When I finished, a reporter from Forbes stood up, a sharp-looking woman with a press badge and a piercing gaze. "Mr. Whitford," she said, "do you think Lyman Market's success is a declaration of war against Whitford Retail, your father's company?" I paused. Let the question land. Then I smiled. Not the smile of victory, but the smile of someone who had finally found his own path. "I'm not declaring war on anyone," I said. "I'm just doing what my wife, Evelyn Lyman, dreamed of, bringing good food to everyone. If that makes us a competitor to anyone, that's their problem, not mine." Applause again. Louder this time. As I stepped off the stage, the applause echoing behind me, I scanned the rows. And there he was, in the back. My father. His face was hard. Stone. He didn't clap. He didn't look directly at me. But I knew. He'd heard every word. After the conference, the headlines rolled in. Adrian Whitford, the game changer in food retail. They called me the Whitford Rebel, the man who abandoned his family legacy to pursue a greater dream. Some even compared me to David slaying Goliath. I didn't like those comparisons. My father wasn't Goliath. He was just a man trapped by his own pride. Whitford Retail continued to weaken. Shareholders began questioning Nicholas's competence as he struggled under the pressure. A Bloomberg article revealed that Nicholas had spent millions on lavish, ineffective ad campaigns, while Lyman Market won customer trust with authentic, relatable ones. Whitford Retail stores continued to close, and their stock plummeted on the exchange. One evening, as I worked late, Roland walked into my office with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "We need to celebrate," he said, his smile radiant. "Today we officially surpassed Whitford Retail in market share in 3 major states." I took the glass, but didn't drink right away. I looked at Roland, the man who had become a father to me in a way Charles Whitford never could. My throat tightened with emotion I hadn't expected. "Thank you, Dad," I said, the words coming out quieter than I'd intended. "For believing in me." Roland raised his glass, clinking it gently against mine. "No, Addie," he said. "Thank you for keeping Evelyn's dream alive." A week after the celebration with Roland, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. No sender's name, just a single terse line. "Meet me at the Waldorf Astoria, New York, Friday, 7 p.m., meeting room 3. CW. I didn't need a full signature to know who it was. Charles Whitford, my father, was finally ready to face me. I stared at the email, my fingers hovering over the keyboard, torn between deleting it and responding. Part of me wanted to ignore him, to let him drown in the ruins of his crumbling empire. But another part, the part that still carried Whitford blood, couldn't turn away. I needed to look him in the eye, to hear him speak, if only to confirm that I was right to cut ties with him. I replied, "I'll be there." New York greeted me with the biting chill of winter. Gusts of wind swept through streets aglow with Christmas lights. I stepped into the Waldorf Astoria, a place that had once been the playground of the Whitford family during lavish galas. The lobby was as opulent as I remembered, marble columns, warm golden light, but I was no longer the boy trailing behind his father in an oversized suit. I was Addie, a man who had chosen his own path. And I wasn't here to beg for forgiveness. I was here to confront him. Meeting room 3 was on an upper floor, with windows overlooking Manhattan's skyline. When I pushed open the door, my father was already there, seated at the head of the table in a perfectly tailored black suit. He looked older than I remembered, his hair grayer, the lines around his eyes deeper, but his gaze was as sharp as ever, like a blade ready to cut down anyone who dared defy him. He didn't stand, didn't greet me, just gestured for me to sit. "Addie," he said, his voice low and deliberate, as if weighing every word. "You've done well. I didn't expect you to go this far with that cheap supermarket chain." I sat across from him, keeping my expression neutral. "Lyman Market isn't cheap," I said. "We bring good food to everyone. Something Whitford Retail has never done." He gave a dry, mocking laugh that sent a shiver down my spine. "You still talk like a naive idealist, Addie. You think you're changing the world? You're just tearing down your family's legacy." I clenched my fists under the table, fighting the anger rising within me. "Legacy?" I asked, my voice low but sharp. "What's your legacy, Dad? An empire built on arrogance? A family you were willing to abandon for the sake of your ego?" He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You dare talk to me about family? You're the one who betrayed us. You chose that Lyman girl, that low-ass supermarket chain, over Whitford Retail. Did you think I'd stand by and watch you destroy everything I've built?" I met his gaze, unflinching. "I didn't destroy anything. You did that yourself. You chose Nicholas's birthday party over the funeral of my wife and children. You chose your reputation over your family. That was your choice, not mine." The air in the room grew heavy. My father fell silent, but I saw his hand tremble slightly on the table. For the first time in my life, I saw a flicker of unease in his eyes. Not regret. No, never that. But uncertainty. He stood and walked to the window, staring down at the city below. Whitford Retail is struggling, he said, his voice flat like he was reading a financial report. Shareholders are pulling out. Nicholas, he's not strong enough to hold the company together. I need you, Addie. Come back. Help me save it. You're still my son. I almost laughed, but the sound caught in my throat. Save the company? I asked. You think I'd come back after everything you've done? After you disowned me? After you didn't even show up to Evelyn's, or Iana's, or Marcus' funeral? He turned back, his face hardening. I was busy, he said, his voice cold. I have responsibilities to the company. To the shareholders. You wouldn't understand. I stood, stepping closer to him, just a few feet away now. Busy, I repeated, my voice trembling with anger. Too busy to see your daughter-in-law and grandchildren one last time? Have you ever felt regret, Dad? Have you ever thought about how you chose Nicholas's birthday party over standing by me when I lost everything? He didn't answer. He looked at me, his eyes clouded, not with tears, but with the emptiness of a man who had lost everything and still refused to admit it. I shook my head, feeling the last invisible thread between us snap. I was your son, I said quietly, but you buried me along with them. I turned and walked out of the room, not looking back. As the door closed behind me, I felt a strange sense of liberation. I was no longer Addie Whitford, the eldest son of Charles Whitford. I was Addie, fighting for Evelyn's dream, and I wouldn't let anyone, not even my father, stop me. In the weeks that followed, Whitford Retail continued to collapse. News reports detailed how the company was selling off assets to pay debts. Nicholas appeared on television trying to maintain an air of confidence, but his eyes betrayed panic. Some major shareholders publicly criticized his competence, calling him an unworthy heir. I didn't feel joy reading those reports, but I didn't feel pity either. Nicholas had chosen to stand with my father, and now he was facing the consequences. Lyman Market, meanwhile, kept expanding. We opened new stores in cities where Whitford Retail had once dominated. The Eat Well, Without Being Wealthy campaign became a phenomenon, studied in universities as a textbook example of values-driven marketing. Suppliers who had once lined up for contracts with Whitford now came knocking at our door. They continued to abandon the old empire, eager to sign with us. I received emails from farmers, real people, not corporate reps, thanking Lyman Market for giving them access to bigger markets than they had ever imagined. One morning, Roland called me into his office. I found him seated behind his desk, calm as ever, but there was something unspoken in the way he looked at me. He didn't say anything at first, just slid a newspaper across the polished wood surface. The headline hit me like a slow punch to the chest. Whitford Retail files for bankruptcy protection. I stared at it. I read the article. The words blurred slightly as I took them in. It felt like a chapter of my life, maybe the longest, most painful chapter, was finally closing. The company my father had spent his life building, I said quietly, my voice almost foreign to me. The one he once hoped I'd inherit. It's now just a name in the headlines. What do you think, Addie? Roland asked. His eyes were searching mine, not with judgment, just with curiosity. I folded the paper and set it down slowly. I don't think anything, I said. Whitford Retail is no longer part of me. Lyman Market, that's my home now. Roland nodded. A faint smile crossed his face. You've done what I never dared dream, he said. Then after a pause, he added, but you know, Addie, what I'm most proud of isn't the revenue or the market share. It's you. A man who rose from the ashes and kept fighting. I looked at him, and for the first time in months, I smiled. Really smiled. There was a slight lightness in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. Thank you, Dad, I said. But this fight isn't over. We still have work to do. 2 years later, Lyman Market had become the dominant name in food retail. We held over 60% of the market share across the United States, a number that, even in his most optimistic moments, Roland hadn't dared to imagine. Our stores had sprouted in places both forgotten and flourishing, from struggling neighborhoods in Detroit to the bustling suburbs of Los Angeles. The Eat Well, Without Being Wealthy campaign was no longer just a slogan. It was a movement. A reminder that good food shouldn't be a privilege reserved for the wealthy. But no matter how sweet Lyman Market's success was, it couldn't fill the void in my heart. I still saw Evelyn in every corner of my life. In the smell of morning coffee. In Oriana's pink dress, still hanging in the closet. In Marcus's tiny shoes, sitting alone in a corner. I had achieved so much, but the cost was too great. I often wondered, late at night, when the house was quiet, whether Evelyn would truly be proud of me. Or if, instead, she'd want me to stop, to slow down, to find some peace in this whirlwind. One crisp autumn afternoon, Roland called me into his office again. He was seated behind the same desk, looking older now, but his eyes still held that same warmth I had seen the first day we met. "Addie," he said softly. I stepped in. "Yeah, I've decided to retire." I froze. "Retire?" I repeated, blinking. "Dad, Lyman Market is at its peak. You can't." He raised a hand gently, stopping me. "I've worked my whole life, Addie. I built Lyman Market from a single store in Portland. And now it's bigger than I ever dreamed." He paused, then sighed. "But I'm tired. I want to spend the time I have left with Marjorie, with our garden, and maybe to remember Evelyn in a way I haven't had time to do." I nodded, slowly. But inside, I felt something tighten. Panic, maybe. Uncertainty. Roland had been the backbone of this company. The man who'd stood by me in my darkest days. The thought of him leaving felt like losing my anchor. "And I want you to take over," he said, locking eyes with me. "You'll be the CEO of Lyman Market." I opened my mouth to protest, but he shook his head. "Don't say no, Addie. You're the right person for this. You understand Evelyn's dream, our values. You've proven that, not just to me, but to the world." I sat there, stunned, feeling the weight of his words settle in my chest. CEO of Lyman Market. It didn't feel real. Evelyn used to joke about it. Those quiet nights at the kitchen table, just the two of us and a stack of unpaid bills, a pot of tea going cold between us. "One day you'll run the whole retail world, Addie," she'd said, laughing as she punched my shoulder lightly. "But don't let it make you arrogant, okay?" My voice came out rough, unsteady. "I don't know if I'm worthy. I've done everything for Evelyn, but I still feel like I haven't done enough." Roland stood, walked around the desk, and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You've done more than enough, Addie. You've made her dream a reality. Now do this for yourself. Live a life you're proud of." I nodded, my throat tight, tears threatening to rise. "I'll try, Dad," I whispered. "I promise." The day I officially became CEO, Lyman Market held a small press conference at our Portland headquarters. It wasn't anything extravagant, but the turnout surprised me. Reporters from across the country, their cameras flashing, pens scribbling. I stood at the podium, heart thudding like a drum, trying to maintain a calm demeanor. "I'm not here to build an empire," I said, voice steady but full. "I'm here to carry on a legacy. Evelyn Lyman's legacy, who believed everyone deserves to eat well and live well. Lyman Market won't stop, because we're not just selling food. We're bringing hope." The applause washed over me like a warm tide. I glanced down and saw Roland and Marjorie in the front row, standing side by side. Marjorie clutched Roland's arm, both of them smiling. And then, just for a second, I saw her, Evelyn, standing beside them, not clapping, just smiling that quiet, luminous smile of hers. Her brown eyes shining with pride. I blinked, and she was gone. But I knew she was there, in every decision I made, in every breath I took as I carried on the work she had started. That autumn, I returned to the cemetery in Portland where Evelyn, Oriana, and Marcus rested. The air was crisp and gold with the changing season, and the hill where they were buried was ablaze with oak trees burning red in the sunset. I walked the familiar gravel path slowly, a bouquet of daisies in my hands, Evelyn's favorite. A breeze drifted by, carrying with it the scent of freshly baked bread from a Lyman Market store down the road, one I'd personally inaugurated just months before. I knelt at the graves, one by one, placing the daisies gently. "I did it, Evelyn," I whispered, voice cracking softly. "Lyman Market is for everyone now, just like you always wanted." I kept my promise. I touched Oriana's headstone. Then Marcus's. "I wish you and the kids were here to see it." I sat there, letting the silence hold me, letting the memories crash like waves. Oriana's laughter as she ran barefoot on the grass, chasing that tattered butterfly kite. The way Marcus had gripped my finger when I held him. Evelyn's smile when she looked at me as if I were her entire world. That memory used to break me. In the quiet moments, when the house was still and the world had gone to sleep, it would return like a whisper. Her eyes, full of light, and the curve of her lips when she saw me. Those images clung to the inside of my mind like wallpaper I couldn't tear down. But as the years passed, something changed. That pain became a kind of strength. A reminder that I had truly lived, that I had truly loved, and that, no matter how devastating the loss, I had something worth moving forward for. I remember the first time I realized I wasn't just surviving, I was living again. A soft breeze swept through Portland that afternoon, carrying the scent of warm bread from the bakery down the road. I stood on the back porch of Roland and Marjorie's house, overlooking their small garden. Bees hovered lazily around the lavender. The sun bathed everything in a gentle gold. For the first time in years, I felt peace, not a fragile, momentary kind, but something real, something earned. I looked out toward the hill where the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in brilliant orange and coral hues. My breath caught, the way it always did when I thought of her. Thank you, Evelyn, I whispered, my voice catching in my throat, for giving me a reason to live. In the years that followed, Lyman Market continued to grow, not just as a company, but as a movement, a belief. But I was no longer a man defined by a fight, or the need to prove something to ghosts. I slowed down. I remembered what Roland had told me the first week I came to Portland. You don't have to be running to get somewhere worthwhile. He was right. I spent more time at their house, helping them tend their garden, pulling weeds, planting tomatoes, listening to Marjorie ramble about basil as if it were sacred. It was the kind of life I never thought I'd have, quiet, rooted, meaningful. One afternoon, Roland passed me a glass of lemonade as we sat on the porch. You look lighter, he said. I glanced at him. Do I? He nodded. You're carrying them with you. But they're not dragging you under anymore. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. It was around that time I started the foundation in Evelyn's name. We focused on providing fresh food to children in underserved neighborhoods, fruit, bread, the basics that had somehow become luxuries in the modern world. Every time I saw a child biting into a fresh apple, their face lighting up like Oriana's used to, I felt something in me mend. In those smiles, I saw Oriana. I saw Marcus. And I knew I was doing the right thing. As for the whites, I cut all contact. There was no dramatic declaration, no confrontation, just silence. My father left New York after Whitford Retail went bankrupt. I heard he moved to a small house in the suburbs. Nicholas tried to start another company, but he failed. I wasn't surprised. My mother sent letters. Kind ones, apologetic in tone. I read them once, maybe twice. But I never responded. Not because I couldn't forgive, but because I had found something they never gave me, a real family. One built not on blood, but belief. The Lymans, the workers at the market, the children who smiled when they held fruit I helped bring to their tables. They were my family now. My story ends here. But my life doesn't. Each morning, I wake up carrying Evelyn, Oriana, and Marcus in my heart. I walk into the office and see Lyman Market employees working with purpose, with care, with heart. And I know, truly know, that I've found what I was always meant for. I'm no longer Addie Whitford, the eldest son of an empire. I'm Addie, a man who lost everything but found himself again, who turned pain into hope, and who will keep living for those I love and for myself. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.